Closing down our final table from the US is seed number 8 with 2.9 million. Please put your hand together for Dylan Weisman.
You are not going to want to miss this. Today, over on Upswing Poker, I, Dylan Weisman, am giving you a free preview of my new course, Crushing PLO Tournaments. This preview comes from the Play and Explain section, where I go through a hand at my most recent final table in a $75,000 buy-in Triton PLO over a WSOP Paradise. It's a really cool analysis that I wanted to give you all a first glimpse into before the course comes out. The first hand at this final table that we're going to review has me in a particularly precarious situation. Before we go into the hand itself, let's look at the distribution of chips as well as seat positioning to figure out what everyone's incentives are. The first thing that you'll note is that we are one of the middling stacks here on the button. We have about 36 big blinds, and there are two other stacks in like the 35 to 40-ish big blind range, followed by the chip leader who has a lot of chips, and then three small stacks, one 10 big blind stack, one 13 big blind stack, and one 20 big blind stack. When you're the middling stack, such as myself, your incentive is not to play hands against one of the people who can bust you. There are so many people at this final table who will, at a high frequency, leave the tournament before us, and so we do not want to put ourselves on the chopping block unless it is necessary. With all that being said, we still do want to try to get chips when they are available, especially if we can find a sneaky double up through the chip leader. They're the best person for us to double up through, because if that happens, we then get to become chip daddy and terrorize the final table. With all that being said, I want us to now look at the individual hand. We have the chip leader opening with the deuce 4-5-7 double suited. It is Matthias Eibinger. He is a very good no limit hold'em professional. He is a good PLO player, but I think he's still kind of learning the ropes for PLO, or at least he was at this time. It's on me, I'm on the button, and I have King King 10-9 tri-suit. This is a very good and playable hand. With that being said, we want to ask ourselves, what's the best way to play it in this particular situation if we're supposed to even play it at all? Before I give you the data, I want you to ask yourselves, what would you have done in this situation, especially when Matthias uses a 2.5x opening size? Now that you've thought through what you would do in this situation, let's talk about all of the different factors that we have to be paying attention to when making our choice. The first one is the opening range and the opening sizing of the chip leader in this situation. In general, when you're the chip leader, you actually don't want to use a 2.5x opening sizing very much. You usually are going to want to size up to 3x or 3.5x. In this situation, Matthias used a 2.5x opening sizing, which actually makes us want to call more and 3-bet less. Additionally, because he's the chip leader, we know that he's going to be opening a ton of hands, especially when he's opening it into one of the middling stacks, because those middling stacks are not going to be able to fight them a lot post-flop. It actually makes more sense to open into a middling stack than a small stack in a lot of situations when you are at the final table in a PLO event, because those middling stacks, they're not going to get to realize their equity. And so we know Matthias is really going to be getting after it here. Additionally, we are at a stack depth where we can 3-bet and fold to a 4-bet. When this is possible, we get to create a kind of polar 3-betting range, which means that there are going to be some hands that are good enough to 3-bet, but don't want to call a 4-bet, or have really good blocker properties, and we're just going to want to attack the chip leader, who we know is opening pretty wide. With all that being said, when Matthias uses his smaller opening sizing, that 2.5x, he's actually going to fold to 3-bet a lot less than he would if he opened to pot, and so maybe we don't want to 3-bet quite as much with that polar range. The last, and in my opinion, probably most important thing here, is that our combo does not contain an ace. When you're at a final table and the chip leader opens, you really want to have high card power, particularly an ace in your hand when trying to combat them with a re-raise, because if they ever have a probability of being able to 4-bet you, they're going to want to take it because they're the chip leader and they can lean on you. The fact that we don't have an ace in our hand really leans us towards taking less aggression, because the probability of the chip leader 4-betting, either with pocket aces or a bluff that contains an ace, goes up by a lot. Now that we've taken into account all the different variables going into our decision, let's see what our actual strategy is. The first thing that you'll notice here on the top left side is that if you are the chip leader, if you use a smaller sizing, you actually have to do so at a slightly lower frequency. This is counterintuitive to what most people believe. They think, if I open for a smaller sizing, I can open more hands. In reality, specifically at PLO final tables with ICM, the opposite is the case. You want to use a larger sizing because then your opponents cannot call at as high of a frequency, which means you can steal more often. This is how GTO works. If your opponents don't care if you opened a 2.5x or 3.5x, it's not as big of a deal. But I actually do think that in human psychology, when they face a pot size open versus a 2.5x open, they are going to fold at a higher frequency. And so I really side with the solver here in terms of using 3x or 3.5x as my opening sizing at PLO final tables. When it comes to the response to those opening sizings, it is as I stated before. If they use a smaller sizing, we want to call more and 3-bet less. If they use a larger sizing, we want to 3-bet more and call less. In terms of our individual hand, it is directly correlated to how we should play relative to that opening sizing. If our opponent were to pot it, our 3-bets look something like ace, king, king with the suit, ace, king, king, 10, or ace, king, king, queen, rainbow, for example. Even if we're facing pot, we can 3-bet like rappy kings double suited without an ace. Against the smaller sizing, however, we don't want to 3-bet as much. As I said, they're not going to fold to the 3-bets, and so that's not a good thing at a final table. You really want the chip leader to fold when you 3-bet. And so now it's really only like ace, king, king double suited and aces, as well as like some ace double suited rundown type combos that are good to kind of balance our bluffs. King, king, 10, 9 tri-suit, my combo, facing pot can actually find fold in this ICM scenario. We really don't want to be flatting very often, and the tri-suit doesn't do us any good. With that being said, our opponent used 2.5x, and so now we're allowed to call with this particular combo. In real life, we had a wrinkle show up that was very different than what the solver would do. Ding Biao, who was the shortest stack in the tournament, overcalled the small blind with Jack, Jack, 10, 3 tri-suit. I'm not gonna lie, that's a big old punt. Ding Biao is very much in the ICM is for poor people scenario because he is not a poor person, and he was just, as a short stack, I think looking for a situation to try to flop a set or flop any sort of connectivity and then get it in, hopefully double up, be able to shoot for that Triton title that he's really trying to get. Those are not the hands we want to play as a short stack. If we are going to VPIP pocket jacks here as a 10 big blind stack, it's got to be a hand like Jack, Jack, 10, 10, or Jack, Jack, 8, 8, or even a hand like Jack, Jack, deuce, deuce, a hand that's very easy to play post-flop. If you have the very, very good jacks, like ace, jack, jack, double suited and things like that, they would just want to 3-bet. What you'll note here at the bottom is that in this configuration, as a 10 big blind stack, you should be squeezing about 10% of the time in the small blind. If we give them only 8 big blinds, that squeeze percentage actually jumps up to 25%. What's really nice about this is that the button flatting range, it will have some protection in terms of some pocket aces, but in general, we're just gonna be able to get that free 5 chips or 2.5 big blinds from the button call once the chip leader rejams and isolates, and so that squeeze becomes extra profitable. Another really interesting idea here is that we'd rather have a hand like 7, 6, 5, 3 single as a small blind because it has better non-overlapping properties. When I flat the button here, I'm gonna have high good cards. It's very likely. The chip leader, they can have a lot of bullshit, but I cannot. And so when you have a hand like 3, 5, 6, 7, for example, it's going to play better against that button flatting range. Jack, Jack, 10, 3 is right in the wheelhouse of cards that I'm going to be flatting on the button, and so it does not operate very well in terms of generating equity against both ranges. So now we've gotten to the flop. I have king, king, 10, 9, 3 clubs, 1 spade with the king of spades. And so I don't have the nut flush draw. I have a pair of kings with the king of spades blocker, which is very relevant, as well as a gutter. In general, if the small blind's playing GTO, this actually isn't the worst flop to open jam on. The reason why this is true is because the cutoff, who's the chip leader, they don't actually have to have a lot of aces in their range. Same thing with me flatting on the button. I'm going to be 3-betting a lot of combos with an ace in them. And so when we have a solid small blind flatting range, this board might not be bad for us. With that being said, it's completely fine to play a range check as well. One thing that I do want to note is that because the cutoff has that very wide opening range, they actually shouldn't be c-betting here as much as you might expect. Yes, they might have the advantage in ace-ace, even though the button, myself, will be trapping aces sometimes, but they just also have a lot of hot garbage. A big mistake that a lot of chip leaders make at final tables is they like to c-bet too much on these high card boards, because they just assume that they have the range advantage. That would be true in chip EV. In ICM, however, the flatting range, especially when it's one of those middling stacks, has a very high card heavy range. And so a board like ace queen 6 is actually doing better for me as the button flatter than it is for the cutoff chip leader as the opener. So with all that being said, it makes sense that the cutoff should actually be checking here at a very high frequency, if not checking all the time. The cutoff in general would be doing better on a flop like 7-5-4, because they have all that random BS in the low and middle parts of the deck. I will not have that as the button flatter. So now it's check to me. I'm on the button. What do I do? When we're thinking about whether or not to bet or check, we want to ask ourselves a couple very important questions. How much equity does my hand have? And how much equity does my hand remove from my opponent's range? In this particular situation, it does a little bit of both. I have the nut gutter, which adds some equity, but that's kind of it. I have a pair of kings, that hand's okay. And so if I bet and they both fold, that's a pretty good thing. But with that being said, what I don't have is the ability to remove equity from my opponent's range, particularly when it comes to the pairs. In ICM scenarios, if you're betting as one of the more vulnerable stacks and you don't have a very good hand, you really need to reduce your opponent's probability of continuing. The best way to do that is by having pair blockers. I have no pair blockers. If I had pocket kings here with a 10 and the nut spades, I would check back as well. I don't want to get check raised by the chip leader in this situation, and that's going to happen. And so because I would check back my nut flush draws with my kings, I'm also going to check back this combo because I don't have those pair blockers. It's kind of a delicate dance to figure out whether or not you want to check or bet, if you want to generate fold equity. But in this scenario, it didn't make a lot of sense for me to bet, especially when a player like Matthias, who is going to have a check raising range, can find that check raise. And so I don't want to give up my opportunity of hitting the nuts on the turn or hitting a spade and being able to like bet turn, bet river big and get almost every other hand to fold. In real life, after I played check back, the turn came the 5 of diamonds, which gave Matthias a pair, plus a straight draw, plus his flush draw. And once he barreled, I had nothing to do but to fold. That's what I have for you today in terms of a free preview for my upcoming course, Crushing PLO Tournaments. If you like what you saw, make sure to sign up at the waitlist below so that you can get notified when the course goes live on 4/20. Thanks for being here. Have a great day.